When my father wrote The Thin Red Line, he felt he'd written 150 pages of the book, and my mother read it and didn't like it. And she thought it was much too cold and removed and technical. So he just threw him in the fire and started all over. That's when he came up with the concept of C for Charlie as one dynamic, moving entity. And that really gave him the solution that he was looking for, and he was off. I think that's what's amazing about The Thin Red Line. It doesn't try to be Tolstoy. It's just what it is. It's these guys. C for Charlie is not made up of college graduates, and they don't sound like college graduates. And I love that about it, I really do. And I think as soldiers, the ones who survived suffered a great deal when they came home. I don't think any of them really even understood what post-traumatic stress was or what was going on for them, what they were feeling. Pull yourself up. Don't go to the psychiatrist. You're not a man if you admit that this hurt. But I think the ones who were sensitive and truly compassionate human beings suffered enormously. In fact, there's a line, it's a psychiatrist who said they came back wounded and that we could fix, but their souls were torn out of them, and that we couldn't fix. My father really believed that war and the army destroys its best men. The truly great men, had to be capable of great compassion and understanding for humanity, would not survive, could not survive this experience. There was a long tradition of soldiering in his family. His father was in World War I, and he had two great-great-uncles buried in the same cemetery, Southern Illinois, who were on opposite sides in the Civil War. My father grew up in Robinson, Illinois, which is a town of, I think, 5,700 people. And it was a real pioneer village. They came in covered wagons. Some of them came from Wales, across New York State. They settled in Iowa and then moved to Illinois. So they have that real central United States pioneer mentality of everybody should have a gun because they have a right to protect themselves against whoever's attacking, completely landlocked. Many of the soldiers who went into the peacetime United States Army were from these very, very poor center of the United States red state type of families where, they'd lost everything in the Depression, everything. They had no money at all. So we're not talking about a rah-rah group that felt that they were doing anything inspired or courageous to protect their country at all. So my father was a child of the Depression. His family lost all their money. So he was from this sort of poverty-stricken fancy family. And at that point, his father said, look, your grades are terrible. You're always in trouble. You don't have a chance in hell of getting any kind of scholarship to college. Join the Army. But go to Hawaii because nothing's going to happen there. You'll be safe. So join and go to Hawaii. The war is going to be in Europe. So he was there about, at that point, a year, I think, when this happened on December 7th. Schofield Barracks is in sort of the middle of the island of Oahu. It's up and it's sort of in the valley between the mountains. And so the Kolikoli Pass, which climbs very high into the mountains, was where they flew through. That's where the airplanes came through, right over Schofield Barracks, on their way to Pearl Harbor. And they were just hanging out on a Sunday morning, all of them hung over in the morning, when they heard some bombs dropping, and they thought it was dynamiting at Wheeler Field. Somebody said, oh, wow, isn't that weird? It's Sunday. Next thing they knew, the Japanese planes were flying over the quadrangle and strafing. They had no idea what was going on, and it was completely unexpected. Did anybody think at the time that war was the right thing? I think they did because they were attacked. They were young men. They were 18, 19, 20 years old, and they were part of the regular peacetime army. They were not draftees at that point yet. And no one thought the war was going to hit Hawaii. Everybody thought that Europe was going to be the first front. Nobody thought that there was going to be a Pacific theater. And they were so absolutely shocked. They felt pretty much, I think, that we need to stand up and defend. They then prepared them for a Japanese invasion. And then they were the forefront. They were the first to be sent out to the Pacific theater. They became known as the Tropic Lightning Division. That was the nickname they were given, Tropic Lightning, because they made their way like lightning through the jungles of the islands in New Georgia, in the New Georgia campaign and Guadalcanal and so forth. And that was how they got that name. They were not expected to be as good as they were, and they really swept through the Pacific and really fought bravely and did an amazing job in the face of huge Japanese opposition. So he was very proud of that. He was very proud that had been a member of the Tropic Lightning Division, even though really he was in combat only a couple of days before he was wounded and sent back for a superficial head wound. And it was not the superficial head wound that sent him home. It was a tear of a muscle in his ankle, which was an old wound that had been re-damaged in this fight, and he needed to go back and have it put back together. So he ended up in the hospital in San Francisco, and then he was sent to Memphis, Tennessee. This was 1943 by now, and he got his papers, and he had to report back to duty. He was going to be part of the invading army, which landed in France on D-Day. And he felt, and he told me this himself, and I'll never forget it, because he took me to I get choked up even thinking about this. He took me to the beach. He took me back to the cemetery in Colville-sur-Mer above Omaha Beach. And we walked that whole cemetery. The thing that killed him was the unknown soldier crosses. But he walked through that whole cemetery with me, and he said, I would be here. I would be dead. I would be one of these graves. And I knew that. My luck had run out. That's what he said. My luck had run out. He got his papers to go back, and he decided to act crazy. So he went AWOL. They brought him back. He went AWOL. He told them he had killed a man, this is true, in hand-to-hand combat in Guadalcanal. He'd gone to the bathroom. He'd gone off into the jungle to go to the bathroom. He was very private that way. He went off to go to the bathroom, number 2. And out of the jungle came a Japanese soldier, starving to death, truly half-starved soldier. And they fought, but neither one of them wanted to fire a weapon. My father didn't have a weapon anyway. He didn't have his gun. The guy came at him with his bayonet, and my father went to the side in a football move. They struggled, they fought, and he killed him by bashing his head in with the butt of the rifle. And he wrote about this in many places, but he never told the story to anybody as his own experience. He fictionalized it, but he had the Japanese soldier's wallet. He kept this wallet all his life. So he was a very odd combination of not pro-army, but of loving the army that gave him a home and took him in, and of being against warfare. You know, as much as he loved the Midwest and loved the United States, he despised the Puritan hypocrisy that really overshadowed his entire childhood and his entire adulthood. When my father first saw the film From Here to Eternity, he didn't like it at all. He felt betrayed in a sense. He felt that they'd cleaned it up way too much. He really was upset that so much had got cut out. And he felt that From Here to Eternity was not even obscene or not even, he thought he was the first one to use the 4-letter F word in fiction. And he wrote a letter about censorship to his editor. That's one of the most beautiful things I've ever read. 29 years old, and he wrote this letter about censorship. Why is this considered prurient now? Who's going to say it's that way in 5 years? Can you imagine the things that are on television now that everybody says and hears and watches? I mean, it's incredible. He was so prescient. And he said, no, I'm not cutting those words out. Let them sue me. Let the post office refuse to send the books. He felt confined and constrained, especially by the sexual hypocrisy that was sort of prevalent. He was not in any way even a socialist or a communist at all, but he was really angry by what happened with the McCarthy era. One of the reasons that my father decided to go to Europe was really, I wouldn't say so much political as an issue of freedom of speech and freedom of behavior. I think in France, they were freer to be free. Plus, he was interested because of all the books he'd read by Hemingway and Fitzgerald and everybody who'd gone before him to Europe, and he really wanted to be a part of that at the same time and experience that. But I think it was more that he just was angry and felt constrained by society's mores, I think, more or less. This was before really the sexual revolution hit. This is before the height of the 60s that they went to France. And they ended up staying because my mother got pregnant and she couldn't travel. I think at first they figured, we'll stay just a few years. And then they were entrenched. Most of my parents' friends who were in Europe, who were of their generation, had children who were older than we. My father was 39 when I was born. So most of their friends already had teenagers. And what he saw with his friends' kids is that they were not American. The parents had made every effort to speak to them only in French, because we're in France after all, so the kids were not American. They were not French really, but they were definitely not American. And the idea of him having French children was so appalling to him that he made every effort in the world to make us as American as possible. He hated that Eurotrash brat type of thing. And he said, I want you to go to American colleges. I want you to feel American and to be American. But there were some ways in which we couldn't possibly be American. We didn't know a lot of things. But at least we pretty much sounded American. And we knew about John Wayne. My father was an extremely disciplined writer, methodical, precise. He would get up at 6 in the morning, no matter what time they went to bed. And his office was upstairs, 3 flights up in Paris. And he would come and check on us, and we'd be getting up or whatever, and we'd see him go. And he wouldn't talk much. He'd just, be on his way in the morning, and up he'd go. And then he would stop at lunchtime and come down and have something to eat. He was a slow writer. My father was somebody who had an incredible memory and imagination, and he would work it all out in his head. He didn't have boards up, but he did draft after draft, and you'd see piles and piles of papers everywhere where he was working on different things and huge numbers of pages. My father felt even at the time that there was a great propaganda machine attached to war and warfare, no matter what generation you were talking about, that it was really cleaned up when it was presented to the country. There are a few things on this. The first thing is that the generals were very clean. They were back behind the hills. They were safe. They knew they weren't being fooled at the time. They were the ones in front of the guns. But an individual life's not important. It's the life of the company that's important. Can we take that hill? And what's a good number of casualties? What's an acceptable loss in a case like that? And if you're one of them, well, too bad. Too bad for you if you're one of those. And so he makes great fun, I think, of the bureaucracy, of the higher-ups in the army who want, to gain their stripes or to show off in front of the generals who are watching from a distance. Recognize him and Fife as the one who types, the clerk who's always being called a coward by Welsh, and Fife, who's pretty much not really in the film that much, is the observer. But he doubts his own bravery all the time. And my father, as a young, thought of himself absolutely as somebody who was terrified and not brave at all, and not one who would jump out and run out and save somebody else. He really did not see himself as a heroic warrior. He did do something very heroic. He did run out and shoot up a guy with morphine who'd had his intestines shot out, and he got the Bronze Star for that. My father, only I think once that I remember, but it was so momentous. He took out the Japanese soldier's wallet in Paris, and I don't know how it happened, and I don't remember what reason was behind it, what brought that up. Maybe he came upon it up in his office, but he brought it downstairs, and he was sitting at the long dining room table, and he opened this little Japanese wallet, and he took all the pictures out and was going through them and crying over this soldier he killed. And he didn't have to say very much. That was an amazing experience. And I remember my brother saying something about, war, watching the John Wayne movies. And my father saying, oh no, it's not like that at all. I think that's what he felt, that the war got the best of him and took the best of his whole generation.